Carried. Clause 8, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 9, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 10, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 11, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 12, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 13, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 14, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 15, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 16, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 17, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 18, coming into force, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and the consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts as the follows the Administration of Estates Amendment Act 2019, a bilingual bill. Here. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 187, the Administration of Estates Amendment Act 2019, a bilingual bill without amendment.
Also moved.
Mr. Dutremont so moves. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. We will now be considering Bill number 189, the Coroner's Amendment Act 2019. We will begin our consideration of Clause 1, short title. Minister Morgan, please introduce your officials and make any opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am joined this evening by Neil Carcutt, Senior Crown Counsel, Legislative Services Branch, Ministry of Justice and Attorney General, Darcy McGovern, Director of Legislative Services Branch, Clive Wayhill, Chief Coroner, Saskatchewan Coroner's Service, as well as my staff in the office here. I will offer opening remarks regarding Bill 189, the Coroner's Amendment Act 2019. This bill will update the Coroner's Act 1999 to implement recommendations from the review of the Office of the Chief Coroner that was completed by Mr. Wayhill in 2018, together with further improvements that have been identified by the Saskatchewan Coroner's Service. The proposed changes will grant the Chief Coroner authority to appoint coroners rather than the Minister. The changes will also allow an inquest coroner to make recommendations at the conclusion of an inquest in concert with the jury. Both sets of changes are based on recommendations from the review. In addition to these legislative changes, numerous recommendations were implemented through policy, including creating a mass fatality plan, initiating regular training for community coroners, and holding regular meetings with organizations such as the Saskatchewan Health Authority and the Saskatchewan Association of Chiefs of Police. In addition to changes arising from the review, the Coroner's Service provided a number of further recommendations that are included within this bill. Some of these changes include allowing family members of a deceased to request a review by the Chief Coroner of a coroner's decision not to hold an inquest, allowing coroners to reopen investigations in certain cases where new evidence arises, allowing for the appointment of a deputy chief coroner and regional supervising coroners. Mr. Chair, at this time I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Wayhill for carrying out the review of the Coroner's Service and for his ongoing service as Chief Coroner. I might add that he conducted a review of our Coroner's Service, made a number of detailed recommendations, including hiring a new full-time Chief Coroner, and then promptly applied for the job himself. So in spite of the fact that it's clearly a made-to-measure job for him, we thank him for his very good service on this. Mr. Chair, with those opening remarks, I welcome any further questions respecting Bill 189, the Coroner's Amendment Act of 2019.
Ms. Sauer?
Thank you, Minister, for your opening remarks. Minister, you spoke about this bill being reflective of some of the recommendations that came out of the review of the Office of the Chief Coroner. Could you provide some detail as to why that review occurred?
We initially engaged Chief Wayhill to do a review. It was commissioned by Gordon Wyant when he was the minister, but it was as a result of concerns raised that the process to determine whether an inquest was to be held or not held was not made, or made at sort of the right parameters in mind. So we felt it was appropriate to create powers around that individual. The other factors that he looked at were the staffing and resources around the clinical and the technical facilities, the lab facilities that are used by the chief coroner. And I understand that those have been addressed or dealt with, and the chief coroner is now able to, I think, carry out his functions in a manner that the public would have a greater deal of confidence than they might have before. I don't have a lot other to add. I don't know whether former Chief Wayhill wants to add anything to that or not.
In terms of specific events that occurred that required this recommendation, you had mentioned that there were some concerns from the public around whether or not an inquest was being or not being ordered.
It was before my time in the portfolio, but I think at that time, people raised issues in the press or in the media that there should or should not be inquests being held, and it was a matter of wanting to have a better or more thorough process in conducting the inquest. But I couldn't point to a specific one.
Not sure if Mr. Wayhill has more information.
Clive Wayhill, Chief Coroner for the province. Just to follow up to the minister's answer, with one of the amendments that's before you tonight, we'll bring forward that if a family is not satisfied with the result of not having an inquest, they can have a formal review done by the Chief Coroner, and the Chief Coroner must, within 60 days in writing, reply to the family why or why not they're going to have an inquest. So I think we've been trying to answer that question in a real open and transparent way to the families.
Thank you. Would you say, Mr. Wayhill, sorry that you were walking away from the microphone and I'm talking to you again, that was as someone who, we have the pleasure of the person who conducted the review, and the chief coroner is also here in one person. Since you also conducted the review, would you say that was the main concern you heard from members of the public when you were doing your review?
There were different concerns. As we still run into, once in a while now, we're going to do an autopsy on a person, and the person says, no, I don't want my family member to have an autopsy. Or we've run into the reverse, we don't think we should do an autopsy, and the family wants an autopsy. So we're running into those situations where we're trying to deal with families, and we've hired a family liaison consultant to work with families now, so that when we have these small disagreements, we have somebody that can meet with the family so they don't have to come up against a big bureaucracy to try and get their issue solved. And also with inquests. A lot of people don't understand the reason for an inquest. They're looking to find fault. And so once again, the family liaison consultant will work with the families and be with the families right through the inquest, leading up to the inquest, so the family understands what they can expect and what may be expected from the inquest.
Thank you. As you have already mentioned, there have been a number of changes to that office over the past few years. Are there plans on any further changes, or is this legislation the conclusion of the work and the recommendations?
Would you like me to give you a quick rundown of some of the changes?
I'd love to, yeah.
Okay, We've reached an agreement with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. They run the Roy Romano lab. We don't have a forensic laboratory in Saskatchewan to do our toxicology. Most provinces do. We now have an agreement, thankful to the funding that we received in last year's budget, where we'll be upgrading the lab to a forensic toxicology laboratory at the Roy Romano lab. We had requests for additional training for our community coroners. We have about 75 lay coroners around the province. The training for them was inadequate, I should say. So we have a learning and development coordinator we've hired, and we're running sessions of training for our community coroners now. We've hired another additional forensic pathologist. In fact, he just flew into Canada from the United States today, got cleared for his visa. He'll be starting up in Saskatoon with us in the first week of July. I mentioned the family liaison consultant. We've hired a policy researcher. All our policy was on paper. So it'll be upgraded now and be put on electronic versions so that our community coroners can access from wherever they are in the province for up-to-date policy. Identifying clothing for our coroners when they're at the scene so people, police, and the family know who the coroner is. Any recommendations that we have from inquests now are put on the website, and the people or agency that are named in those recommendations are asked to give their answer back to us, and that's put on the website as well too, to see what they're doing with those recommendations. The amendments for the Coroners Act, what we're here for this evening. The mass fatality plan has been created and worn out to all our community coroners. We've done a lot of Indigenous education training for all our staff. And we have a fee-for-service inquest council that conducts all our inquests for us now and runs our inquests, so we have that continuity now when we have inquests. So those are probably the big building blocks that we have right now.
Thank you. A lot of good work done over the last little while here. Moving forward, are there more plans that you have for changes to the coroner's office?
The biggest change coming up would be in our pathology area. Right now, we share resources with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. Our pathologists work out of hospitals in Regina and Saskatoon, and we use the Saskatchewan Health Authority staff for administration, for the pathology assistants that help us to do the autopsies and admin stuff. So that's putting a real burden on the Saskatchewan Health Authority now with their budget because we're using all their resources. And as we use their resources, they're not doing the clinical medicine they should be doing, looking at cancer biopsies and things along that line. So we're trying to work out. I've had a review done of our pathology services. I asked the chief coroner from Matt Bose from Nova Scotia. He came in and gave us a review of our whole pathology services. I've just shared that now with the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and we're looking at about a 4 or 5 year stage to equalize their services within pathology.
Thank you. Are there any recommendations, further recommendations out of the review that still need to be implemented in legislation, or is this the conclusion for the
These will be the
legislation?
ones for legislation. There will be some regulatory changes. All the payments for coroners and for transportation and all those things are all within the regulations. So once we get the act passed, we'll be putting some recommendations forward for the regulations as well too.
Thank you. Are there any plans to implement any measures to ensure that recommendations from inquests are followed through, other than the addition to transparency on the website and the request that they respond to the recommendations? Is there any plans for ensuring that those recommendations are in fact implemented?
Not at this time. I think, as most of us are aware, that there is no legislative authority for us to mandate that they do the recommendations. We're hoping by us putting them on the website, which would then create an atmosphere where they should respond to our recommendations, so that it's all in the public as well too. And I have to say, for every inquest that we've had since I've been here, every recommendation that we put on the website, we've had an answer back from those agencies on what they're going to do with that recommendation.
Does your office have the? Okay.
More detail, if you like. We make a distinction between the role of the coroner's office and the role of the legislature. The role of the coroner's office is to make the recommendations. The recommendations are made public. They're posted online and often accompanied by a news release. We don't think it's within the proper purview of the coroner's office or the chief coroner to make rulings that would be either judicial rulings or be legislative rulings. So we think the accountability comes once the recommendations are made, and then it's up to government to ensure that they're mandated. And I think what you heard tonight was that they invariably have been so far, and our expectation is in most cases they would be, but it's certainly a possibility that a recommendation might come that for whatever reason government want to, and then that would be a government accountability issue.
Thank you, Minister, and I will be sure to hold you and your government accountable for the recommendations that Mr. Wayhall's office makes. I'll keep that in mind for estimates on Wednesday.
I'll expect nothing less.
Mr. Wayhill, does your office have the capacity to follow up? Like you said, all of the recommendations that you have made have received answers from various, typically, ministries as to how they're going to follow through with those recommendations, does your office have the capacity to then check back essentially in a few months to see if those recommendations have actually been, and the response that you've received has actually been followed through?
No, we haven't checked back. We're relying on you get a minister or the RCMP or a police service that says they're going to do something. We don't go back and check to make sure they've done it.
Thank you. Now, I want to ask specifically about Clause 19, subsection 37, sub 1, which is repealing that section and replacing it with new verbiage, which is, as you know, making it a little bit more difficult for third parties to be able to participate in inquests. Can you provide some information as to why this change is being made?
Neil Carcutt, Ministry of Justice. So in recent years, they've seen a number of inquests that have drawn significant public attention. And while it's recognized that the results of the inquest can have an important impact on many of those groups, that needs to be balanced with the inquest process and ensuring that it focuses on the individual who is deceased and those who are connected to the deceased, such as the family members. This change, which follows through with what some other jurisdictions have done, achieves a balance between ensuring that those individuals who are connected with the deceased, and I'll touch on that a little bit too, have an opportunity to participate in the inquest while, I guess, balancing out an overly very timely and cost-intensive process. And just, I know that there's been some concerns raised, and I just want to note that groups that, we use the language as substantial and direct interest, groups that have demonstrated specialized knowledge and expertise that is relevant to the inquest. So for example, the John Howard Society of Saskatchewan or the Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan would still be expected to fall within those standards and would still be expected ultimately at the discretion of the coroner, but they're meant to be included within that standard and would still be eligible to play a role in the inquest within their respective specialized expertise.
Do a family of the deceased receive access to free legal counsel for the inquest?
Clive Wayhill from the Coroner Service. We're the only province that pays for families. We're the only province that pays for families to come to an inquest. We will provide funding for them if they have to travel. We pay mileage. We pay their hotel and meals while they're at the inquest for 2 people from the family. And if they can't afford a lawyer, we will pay a sum towards a lawyer to prepare for standing for them, to prepare before the inquest and to be with them during the inquest. Once again, we're the only province that does that voluntarily.
How much do you provide financially for that lawyer?
We pay $100 an hour for 3 days preparatory time and $100 per hour for every hour they're at the inquest. That's the same amount of money that's paid for the inquest counsel and the inquest coroner.
Who are automatic parties to inquests?
There are no automatic. If we would think an inquest is similar to a trial where the coroner is a judge, and so that the coroner has complete authority over that inquest, so the people have to come forward and request standing, and the coroner will then grant standing. Usually for a family, that's done all the time. That's not a problem at all. We'd like to have a family have standing if that's preferable for them.
Do families sometimes not get standing?
Sometimes families don't ask for standing.
They don't ask, but if they ask for it, they are granted.
If they ask for it, and we always tell them up front that if they need help for standing, we'll help them out with that.
Have there ever been instances where families have been at inquests and aren't able to obtain counsel? Are they representing themselves?
In my tenure as a chief coroner, that's never happened. We've always, I think, almost for everyone that's had standing, anybody that's asked for standing has received it.
Okay. As you had alluded to, Mr. Carcutt, this section in particular has raised concerns from Elizabeth Fry Society and the John Howard Society, who have done a lot of work on many inquests in the past and are very concerned about the restriction this could impose on not only their organizations, but organizations like them, because we don't know what sort of organizations will be needed and created in the future. I want to read a portion of a letter that was provided to your office, Minister, by Pierre Hawkins of the John Howard Society, dated November 22nd, 2019, just for the record, expressing the concerns that the John Howard Society has with respect to this provision. And from what I understand, in speaking with the Elizabeth Fry Society, although they haven't provided a similar letter, they are very supportive of the concerns that have been stipulated by Mr. Hawkins. And in this letter, he says, quote, "The John Howard Society of Saskatchewan is concerned that the proposed language, which restricts the coroner's discretion to grant standing, will reduce the perspective, expertise, and assistance available to the coroner and jury in discharging their responsibilities under the Act. Restricting the coroner's discretion to grant standing